Hi, and welcome to another one of my video interviews on how you can take control and get support whilst you're going through IVF, struggling with infertility. And today I'm speaking to the very lovely Zoe Clarke-Coates, who is the co-founder of the Mariposa Trust and Saying Goodbye, who internationally supports so many women and couples through baby loss at any stage and however long ago it was. So thank you so much for talking to me, Zoe. It's lovely to speak to you.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's really lovely, and the work you do is amazing, and I'll let you fully explain, because you'll do a much better job of it than I will in how you're supporting people. But just to get us started, if you're comfortable too, are you okay to talk through kind of share the story of your family first, and how?
Yeah, I'll share it in brief, because I'm sure most people know my story if they follow the work of the organisation and the charity, the work that we do. But we sadly lost 5 babies. So our first pregnancy we lost quite quickly, and that was such a shock, because we just didn't ever expect to be one of those statistics that you hear about. And I journeyed with people through loss, and I was a trained counsellor, as you're aware, before that. So I felt I was fully equipped to deal with grief. I knew the ins and outs of it. I knew how to journey people through that horrendous path. But I realised that all the training in the world didn't actually prepare you for going through loss. But I very much dealt with that loss in a different way to subsequent losses, in the fact that I almost went into denial. I pretended it wasn't happening. That was my way of kind of coping. And we quickly went on to try again. And this pregnancy just felt so different to that first pregnancy. We were going for regular scans. Everything was great. Completely reassured us. We were watching our daughter grow, and honestly just thought that first loss was a one-off thing, and that this pregnancy was so different, that we were on a completely different path than we'd previously been on. And so when I started to bleed one day, I was so scared and so frightened, and instantly thought, oh my goodness, we're losing this baby. But we managed to get a quick scan, a private scan, and within a couple of hours of it actually starting, and they were able to completely reassure us. We could see she was fine, she was kicking away, everything was all great. And so we were really reassured. However, the next day, I just felt something had changed, and I just had this instinct that she'd died. And that's kind of hard to explain to anybody who doesn't or hasn't experienced that themselves, because fear can often make you think something's gone wrong, and then you go for a scan or an appointment and you'll prove wrong and everything's great. But I just had this instinct that she had. The hospital were really, really poor in their care of us that day. Told us that everything would be fine, to go away. We'd had a scan the day before, so why would anything be any different now? And they actually, I'm trying to think of the exact words they used, but words to the something like, wow, why are you so upset? Is it because it's an IVF baby and you paid for it? And that was such a shock to us. It instantly made us feel like we didn't have a right to grieve. We didn't have a right to be upset that potentially we were losing this child, because they only had a value if there was a monetary cost to having this child, which was so shocking. And we were sent away. We were told that we could wait for a week for an NHS scan to find out if she was okay, because there was no reason to think that she wasn't in their eyes. And obviously we weren't going to wait, so we booked a private scan. That was the Saturday, and we got a private scan on the Monday. And as soon as we had that scan, we saw the midwife's face just drop, and a doctor was then called in, and we were told that she had died and her heart had just stopped beating, and nothing could have prepared us for that. Not even the previous loss could have prepared us for that. It felt like the trapdoor opened and our world just literally fell apart. And it was a terrible period of time. It was like being in a valley with no light, and we just didn't know if we would ever be able to recover. And as with everybody, the loss doesn't get smaller, you just get better at carrying it. You get stronger. I call them your grief muscles really strengthen up. And so we journeyed on, and we did feel stronger, and that made us feel like maybe we could try again, which we thought maybe we wouldn't be able to. And so we did, and we tragically went on to lose that third baby. And after those 3 losses, I really felt like we were done. The fact that maybe it just wasn't what we were meant to be doing. Maybe we're not meant to raise children. And the thought of just entering that lottery of whether it was going to be okay or not just felt kind of something that I just couldn't imagine doing. I couldn't imagine going through it again. And so we'd made a decision, the fact that we wouldn't. And in hindsight now, I really think the fact that if we had waited maybe 6 months, maybe a year, I would have definitely changed my mind, because as we say, your grief muscles get stronger and stronger, and then eventually hope rises above the fear, and you start fearing the fact of a life without children, maybe even more so than the fear of going through loss again. So I really do think I would have changed my mind, but actually God had different plans, and I suddenly found out I was pregnant, and I just couldn't believe it, because obviously we'd made the decision not to, and it felt like such a gift, the fact that we didn't have to kind of make that decision. It had been made for us. And that was the first baby we got to bring home. So it was a terrifying pregnancy, of course, but everything went fine, and we got to bring her home. And we just loved raising her. We loved being parents so much that even though we thought we would only have 1 baby, we really quickly started the discussion of maybe we should have more. Maybe 1 isn't enough. Maybe we ought to give her a sibling here on earth. And so when she was maybe around 2, we started trying again, and quickly found out we were expecting. And because we'd brought Esme home, it really felt like this baby was kind of secure. The fact that even though we'd lost 3 babies, that maybe we wouldn't encounter loss again. Maybe whatever had been wrong had been just fixed. And so we were frightened, but also had a real confidence that all was going to be well. So we were going for regular scans, and everything was great. Our little boy Samuel was growing beautifully. And then on one afternoon, we'd gone for a scan, and Esme was with us. And our doctor, who was then a friend, Chris, his face just fell. And I said, what's happened? And he went, I don't even know how to tell you this, but his heart has stopped beating. And there we were again for a 4th time. And because Esme was there, I couldn't just cry or scream. So I just asked if I could leave the room for a minute, and I went into the toilet, and I slid down the wall, and I just screamed and cried. And it was just hellish. It was just a nightmare. It was different to losing the other 3 children. It was in the fact that I wasn't grieving the fact that maybe I'd never have a child to raise because I had one. But added, or as a replacement of that, was that I was now also grieving for her sibling, and I was grieving for her and the fact of her loss as well as our loss. And the thought of, will she never have a sibling here if we're going through loss yet again? And so it was horrendous. It was horrific. It was different, but every loss is different from the other. And I decided to not deliver him naturally. I decided to have a surgical option, because I knew I couldn't just wait to deliver him like I had with Darcy, and I didn't want Esme to be in that environment where, what if we were out and suddenly I went into spontaneous labour, etc. So I made very different decisions because of having her this time. And we had to wait a week for the surgery, I think it was. And yeah, it was back to that same place of desolation and desperation and terror of what the future will hold. And it was awful. But after some time, we decided to try again. And everything was going okay. And we announced to our whole family on Christmas Eve that we were expecting again. And immediately, no joke, 5 minutes after making the announcement, I went upstairs to the loo and I'd started to bleed. And I was just like, are you kidding me? How on earth is this possible? And a doctor quickly confirmed to us that we'd gone through another miscarriage, and that was on Christmas Eve. And so we had to wait all over Christmas. And then at the start of January, I started to get sicker and sicker and sicker. And I'd been bleeding over the whole of Christmas, New Year. And but I just said to Andy, my husband, I just feel like I need to get a scan. I just feel like something is not right. Why am I so sick? And I was so sick, I could hardly even speak. I could hardly even answer a question because I felt so sick. And went for a scan. We found out that the doctor was wrong, that I hadn't miscarried. And actually I was having twins. And that just felt like an utter miracle, that here we were, had been told that we'd gone through loss, but we were expecting 2 babies and everything was okay. And I got sicker and sicker and sicker, and had HG, and had to have regular doctor's appointments. And it was quickly identified something was physically going wrong with me, and that it wasn't all pregnancy related. And I developed a condition connected to my liver and my gallbladder, and needed to have surgery to save my life and the baby's lives. Sadly, we then lost one of our babies, our daughter Isabella, but Bronte clung on in there. And it was a harrowing pregnancy, full of sickness, illness, had to have surgery twice while pregnant. And it felt like we would never get to bring her home right the way through. And then we did. Everything was amazing. And she was safely delivered by C-section earlier than planned, because I developed another condition connected to my liver, which could have been fatal. But she was delivered fine. She was safe. I was told to prepare for full blood transfusions, and they showed me intensive care just before delivery, because they said the fact that I would definitely end up in intensive care for a good few days myself. And I actually lost less blood in the surgery than would have been in a natural delivery. And I went straight back to my room. I didn't have any need for intensive care treatment. And she was our miracle girl, and she survived it all and was healthy and well. And that's our journey, to have our 2 daughters here on earth, but our 5 babies in heaven. And it was going through all of that we saw something was crucially missing out there in terms of support. And my mom's a therapist as well. And so we knew what was missing, because we didn't have anybody to refer people onto. And we were told by our consultants not even go looking for support, because there was nothing really great out there. And what we felt we really needed was an organisation that didn't categorise our losses into, well, that gestation you can get support from XYZ. From that gestation you can get support from this organisation. We wanted a charity that said every one of our babies mattered equally, whether they were lost later or early. It was irrelevant, because all of them were our children. And we also wanted an organisation that was run by people who had been there themselves. So we're not only trained, because training is obviously essential, but also had got that personal experience, because it makes the world of difference if you've walked the path yourself. And we saw that there was nothing out there like that. So we started a not-for-profit division of our international events, PR and marketing business as our way of giving back. And it exploded overnight. The Guardian ran an article on us. Women's Hour asked if they could come and record one of our first remembrance services at Cathedral. And so within a matter of weeks or months, we were getting over 650,000 hits on our website. And now 9+ years on, we have got 6 divisions within the charity, and the charity support reaches over 50,000 people a week, which is incredible, the fact that we have that reach, but also heartbreaking that so many people need that support. So that's the foundation of the charity. And on from that, I was obviously asked to write my first book, which became a bestseller. That's called Saying Goodbye. And then I brought out another 3 books after that, which were also bestsellers. So the Baby Loss Guide, which is a comprehensive guide for anybody who's gone through any type of baby loss, whether it be in pregnancy, at birth, or early years. Then I brought out Beyond Goodbye, which is a general grief support book for the loss of a partner or sibling or parent or friend even. And then my latest book is Pregnancy After Loss, which is a complete support and guide for the whole of your next pregnancy after going through loss. Or if you're just terrified of pregnancy, maybe you've gone through fertility treatment, or maybe you've seen a friend or a family member go through loss, so you're really nervous and really scared, then Pregnancy After Loss guides you through every step of your pregnancy, to help hopefully take away some of the fear and to walk that journey with you. What else is there to say? I'm co-chair of the Pregnancy Loss Review on behalf of the Health Secretary. So that was launched in 2018, where the government said they were committed to making changes to anybody who's receiving any sort of support or care, whether that be from a hospital, a GP, or somebody in the community, and how could they better change that support. And I'm co-chair of that review, which basically means me and my co-chair are responsible for completely writing the report and advising government on what changes need to be made. And so that's an ongoing work. So yes, since 2018, I've been doing that. So I'm seconded 1 day a week to government to do that.
Oh, it's just amazing. And listening to your story, I'm so sorry for what you've been through, and so grateful for what you've done on the back of that as well for so many people. I know a lot of people don't talk about it, and I know you've said yourself, when I've read your story before, you didn't tell people to start with what you'd been through, and people sort of hide it, so they don't always get the support. And I think you're completely right, there isn't enough support around, and the support groups I run for those going through infertility and IVF are very much when they've finally got pregnant, whether that's IVF or naturally, and they've sadly lost their baby, they just don't know what to do next. It's that thing of the fear of getting pregnant again and the same thing happening, or where to go or what to do, whether they should be going to see the doctor straight away and asking for advice on that. There just seems to be such a lack of support and a lack of understanding around how people can move forward from that, kind of in terms of coping, but also in creating their family if that's what they still want to do. So what advice would you give to somebody who's sadly lost their baby at any stage in terms of coping, but then also kind of where to start looking for advice for if they want to start trying again but are scared about trying again?
Yeah, well, firstly, I'd say talk to people. And if you can, talk to your partner, but if not, talk to family or friends, people who get it. Obviously, we as a charity at sayinggoodbye.org are there for anybody who needs that support. But for some people, they don't feel they need external support at all out of their immediate family unit or close friend circle. The important thing is to talk. That's how the brain deals with any sort of trauma, and loss is one of the most significant traumas anyone can go through. And so if you don't talk, the brain doesn't know how to deal with it. So often people will then suffer with other symptoms connected to their grief that they eventually don't even know is part of their grief. They might be going to their GP for stomach conditions or constant headaches or insomnia, or back problems. The body just stores pain in various different ways. And if we don't allow our brain to process trauma, it can often transform into physical symptoms. So that's why it's so important to talk. It's also important for us emotionally to be able to ensure that mentally we don't have repercussions on our mental health, whether that be from suffering with anxiety or irrational fears, for instance. Again, a lot of these things can develop from not dealing with your grief. And grief is patient. Grief will wait 20, 30, 40 years if you want to wait to deal with it. And our organisation supports as many people who lost their babies 60, 70 years ago as people who lost their babies yesterday. So we see firsthand how patient grief can be. If people really want to put it into a box and not deal with it, that is possible with grief. However, it always has consequences if you do that. And that's why we really encourage people from the moment they've gone through something traumatic to talk, to try not to bottle it up, try not to seal it away in a box, because actually you're doing yourself a disservice. And I completely understand the desire to do that. I did that myself with our first loss. And that was kind of a survival mechanism, and it worked for me temporarily. However, it really quickly became apparent I had to deal with that first loss, which I then went on to do. So it was only a temporary fix, and that's okay if you need to do that. If you think there is no way I can face dealing with this right now, maybe other things are going on in your life, then it is possible to press hold for a little while. But the earlier you deal with it, the least effect it has on other aspects of your life. You're always going to be changed as a person when you go through loss. It changes you forever. But what I always want to see from people is the fact that they're not suffering with secondary infertility or physical conditions and all of these different things that for some people, talking and getting therapy up front, that can really benefit. For others, you could do everything by the book and you still suffer with those ongoing consequences. But anything that can limit the chance of them, I'm all for. And so dealing with your grief is my number one recommendation, to not be afraid of it, to look it in the eyes and say, you know, I see you and I'm not scared. And knowing the fact that you only feel this much pain because you carry so much love for that child you have. And so as soon as I tried to see my grief in that way, I became less resentful of it being there. It stopped being something that I didn't want in my life, that I was just like, how do I get through this as quickly as possible? And I treated it for what it was, something to honor, something to not delight in because it's agony, but something to celebrate the fact that I love my children this much, that it hurts this much. And that's a beautiful thing. I'm glad I love them that much. And I'm glad I still love them that much. And as soon as I stopped trying to say to grief, I don't want you in my life, get out. And I became comfortable with it being there and invited it around the table instead of saying, no, you're not welcome in my home. It became so much easier to deal with. It stopped becoming something I was running from and became something that I was okay with, something I wish I didn't have in my life, but I realized it's a lifelong journey. And that means I can now talk about all of my children with a smile on my face. It's so rare I cry about the babies I've lost. I just am so glad that they were here for however short a time they were here. That doesn't mean I don't miss them. That doesn't mean I wouldn't do anything to make it not have been the way it was. I would love them all to be here with me, obviously, but I'm just so thankful that I got to be their mum, and I will always be their mum. And I think that's a real sign of processing grief, the fact that it stops being the enemy and starts being part of your love story with those that you've lost.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is changing the culture around the way we think of baby loss, and you know, the whole culture of not saying anything until people reach 12 weeks, and then almost people feeling ashamed, and when they don't speak about the fact that we're pregnant and they've lost the baby, it's like they have to pretend this baby didn't exist. And then I guess that you're not processing that grief as it. I guess it's probably harder to process that grief if you are almost feeling like that baby didn't exist and that people won't understand why you're grieving the way you are. You know, there's so many comments around, well, at least it was early and things like that. The whole culture needs to change around the support that people are offered, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And that's what we're totally committed to doing. And it's what we've literally given our lives to doing, saying, let's try and change the dialogue around loss as well as the support. Because there is so much shame around child loss. And there's shame around all grief. I mean, as a grief expert, I can say, hand on heart, this is not just a baby loss issue. This is a whole cultural issue around how people here, especially in the UK, this is the case in other places around the world, but especially pronounced in the UK and North America, where we're really uncomfortable with death. We're uncomfortable about the subject. We're uncomfortable about people grieving, the fact that we very much time limit people's grieving journey. And after 6 months maximum, a year if people around you are truly gracious, after that time we expect to see people moving on. We expect to see people returning to life that they were on before going through any sort of significant loss. And actually that is just the most awful thing about the culture that we are in, because that becomes a real societal pressure to return to how we were. And that means the majority of people need to fake it, and they stop being genuine to their feelings and who they are, and they start having to put on a complete different face when they're around certain people to pretend that they're now okay, that life is okay now, to stop those around them feeling uncomfortable. And actually, until we change the culture surrounding death and grief, the fact that actually, one, we should never be expecting anyone to return to normal, because everyone on the other side of grief is different. And so as soon as you put an expectation on somebody that they have got to be like they were before, or return to the party loving person they maybe were before, that's a pressure that they don't need. And so people will either fake it around you, or they will move away from you, and they will develop another group of friends who possibly have been through something similar, so they can resonate with them, so those expectations are lifted. But people don't have the option to do that with family. You've got one family, right? And so you've got to live with them. And so if this pressure comes from a family member, that's something you've got to live with for the rest of your life. And so we need to change the dialogue around loss. We need to change how people feel about it. And that goes back to not excluding children from the subject of death, where we don't invite little ones to funerals because we say, oh, it's too hard for them to see that. It's too traumatic for them to see that. When actually, psychologically, what we're doing when we allow children to be present at those things is that we allow them to start feeling comfortable with the subject of death, that we allow them to see that grief is as much a part of life as loving people is. The fact that people will be born and people will die, and that's not something that anybody should be excluded from. And so the more we include children in these things, the more we mentally prepare them for what they will, because it's the only guarantee in life that we will see people we love pass away. And so we need to change things, and we need to become more comfortable about talking about subjects that make us feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I think as that culture changes gradually over time, it will change. And I think that it's that lack of understanding from people. So I know I listened to the talk you did for the fertility show, and it really resonated with me. I think somebody had asked a question around feeling that they couldn't grieve for their lost embryo after IVF. And it's certainly something that I felt myself when our first cycle it wasn't successful. And I couldn't understand, well, I was absolutely devastated, but people around me couldn't understand why I was so upset for something I'd not had. And I think that lack of understanding around that investment you put into it, like you talked about your children, you'd already seen that life for them. And I was the same, you know, this one embryo, I'd already planned out when my due date would be. I'd already worked through, this would be what my life was like, because my child would be there. And I think it's kind of that being empathic to other people, isn't it? Creating a culture where we're empathic to other people's losses and grief, and an understanding, a wider understanding of some of these feelings that people feel, isn't it?
Absolutely. And not putting certain restrictions on certain types of grief that we say, okay, that's legitimate. So that is okay if they really grieve for a long time. That grief in our eyes is less significant. And so you've got like this ranking order of how much you're allowed to grieve as a person and how much you're allowed to talk about your loss. Well, that loss is so much worse. And you get that even with baby loss, where people will say, well, a loss in pregnancy is less significant than a stillbirth, for instance. And actually, all losses are relative to your personal experience, and all losses, the only person who can say how much it hurts is the person who is going through it. And so no one has the right to determine that for you, and no one has the right to shame you for feeling any amount of pain for the loss you've encountered. And to me, I think a lot of people would say it's not legitimate to grieve for a baby you've never even conceived. Well, I completely disagree. I mean, I will journey with people who have spent their life trying to get pregnant, have never, ever seen a positive test, a pregnancy test result, but they are grieving just as much as those who have and have lost. And because they're grieving the fact that they're never going to be a parent, they're grieving the fact of every single month where they hope to see a positive. All of that is grief. There is not different types of grief in that. Grief is grief. And so you can't say somebody who has seen a positive result has more right to grieve than somebody who hasn't, because both parties are grieving, and both parties are grieving the fact that they haven't got a child in their arms. And that's the bottom line. And that's why when I see people ridiculed for grieving where their IVF cycles have not been successful, and I even hate that word in the fact of what's successful and not. Yeah, I hate that, but you know, that's the term that is commonly used. But when people haven't got a positive pregnancy result at the end of IVF, and they're told, why are you upset? You can just try again. You can just go through another round. Actually, that so minimizes people's story, people's journey, because every one of those eggs has had hopes and dreams all held within it, and every single one of them represents a baby. So whether it fertilizes or not, whether it's successfully implanted or not, and whether it stays there and grows or not, none of that gives anyone more or less right to grieve. Everyone has the right to grieve, because you're journeying the loss of all of your hopes and dreams, and the loss of that one egg that to you isn't an egg. To you, it's a precious child. It's
yeah. And for me, when I heard that, it kind of was just, it was really validating for me, because it was just like, well, that's why I felt the way I did. And yeah, it put perfectly into words how I'd felt when we'd had the negative results and everything that I thought it would mean. And when I shared that on my Instagram account, so many people resonated in my support group. So thank you for almost validating that just because it wasn't a positive, we didn't have a positive test, we can grieve for that. Our hopes that that would work. And, you know, at that point I'd been trying for 6 years, you know, and it's those 6 years I'd been grieving for, as well as that one embryo. And it was so validating to hear that. So thank you. So the Saying Goodbye Trust does so much amazing work. How can people access that support? So say if they have suffered baby loss at any point and they feel that they would really like that support. You've mentioned about kind of talking. What other support can they get, and how can they access that?
Yeah, so anybody who is grieving the fact of a baby gets support, but also anyone who's on the journey for having fertility treatment or battling uncertainties, the team are there for you as well. We've got a division called Waiting for You. So anybody can access support if you're going through anything on the journey to having a baby or after the loss of a child. We always say that the support we offer, we kind of stop at 4 years of age of a loss, but saying that we have people who are asking for support when they've lost 15, 16-year-olds or adult children, when they say it's still my baby, and we never turn anybody away. So the only reason we do up to 4 is because people will still often say that, you know, their 3-year-old, it's my baby. Well, and so it's to do with more the terminology, but we will never turn people away. It's just a lot of our content uses the word baby. And so if people are fine with that, then you can access everything we do, knowing it is for you, because it's for grieving hearts. That's the bottom line. So the things that people can access is befrienders, where people have gone through a loss or a journey who need somebody to journey with them. They are trained befrienders who will be emailing with you, in contact with you regularly, and that is available to people whether a loss be recent or historic. Again, there's no restriction, whether they be male or female, no restriction. And the other things that we offer are obviously all of our social media support, where we post daily, which is a vital lifeline for many people to make them feel understood and heard. We offer saying goodbye remembrance services, and we do those around the world. We do them at cathedrals, minsters and abbeys, apart from in London, where we use Westminster Central Hall. And those services are for anybody who is grieving a baby they've lost, or for anybody grieving a baby that they've never even managed to conceive. And so it's really important for us to stress that, because people are always saying, I feel a bit of a fraud if I haven't actually gone through a loss of a baby, but I'm grieving the fact that I haven't got a child in my arms. And no, please don't feel that way. The saying goodbye services are there for anybody who is carrying grief, that they feel that they need to honour that, to respect it, and to be amongst other people who understand. And so those services happen up and down the UK. The full list is always on sayinggoodbye.org/services. And we've got 2 this weekend, which is rare. We tend to have 1 in a location on each weekend. Occasionally we have 1 in 1 location on a Saturday and another on a Sunday. Everybody's welcome to come along to those, the whole extended family. So that's another thing with baby loss. It doesn't stop at just the parents. It affects siblings, it affects grandparents and aunts and uncles. And so if you want to come as a group to a service, please do. Many people do that, especially if they haven't had a funeral service for their baby, which many people don't get when it's an earlier loss especially. And so people come with their family and say, this is our funeral for our baby. This is a way of us remembering as a family. And it's such a beautiful bonding experience for many families, where they can stand with each other holding hands. The other things we do are campaigning. So people who want to get involved in making changes to how people are supported. We're stakeholders within the Department of Health, but obviously I'm also chairing the government review. And so we're at the front line of making a difference, of saying it's not okay to treat people badly. It's not okay to not give consistent care. It's not okay that it's currently a lottery of whether you will get good treatment or bad treatment. And some of that all happens within the same hospital. I can hear horror stories from somebody who got treatment on a Saturday at one hospital, and then hear amazing reviews of the hospital team from somebody who was treated at exactly the same hospital on the Sunday. And so we shouldn't have that. It shouldn't be a lottery of the hospital, and it shouldn't be a lottery of which staff member you encounter, of whether you get good or bad care. So anybody who really wants to get involved with the campaigning side, definitely get in touch. And obviously we're a charity, so we are totally 100% reliant on fundraising. We don't receive a penny of governmental support, a penny of hospital trust support, even though 70% of all UK hospitals refer to us and give out our leaflets, etc. We have to raise all of the money ourselves. So a great way to help the charity is to come fundraise, whether that be running a marathon, doing a 10K, taking on a personal challenge at home where you will walk so many miles over the course of the year, or a bake sale, or holding a ball, which people will often do for us. They'll hold a local big event, sell tickets. It's an amazing event. The charity can help you promote that. And these are ways that you keep the support going. And a lot of people say, well, I'd love to do that, but I'm really not interested in fundraising. I'm like, well, you do realise the fact that we only exist if people fundraise. So we say to any team member, if you want to get involved, please fundraise too. It's so vital. It's something I don't love doing myself, but I do it every single day because I know it's vital to keep up this support that we offer to people. So anybody who can do anything or convince your company to do something for us, that's also appreciated.
And it's great that it's there for people to access that support when they need it. And I know when you talked about things that people can do and like looking, talking to other people, dealing with that grief, is there anything that people can do as a couple together, if, you know, to cope through it? Because obviously it affects both partners in a couple.
Yeah.
Is there anything?
Yeah, absolutely. And the crucial thing is to talk with one another first and foremost. As I said before, talking is key. And I think the misconception is that we always need to be on the same page with our partner in our grief story. And actually, you don't need to be. You just need to be in the same book. So if you can get comfortable with talking about the loss, also being really non-judgmental with one another, which is hard. If you're grieving at different rates, it's easy to think, well, you're not suffering like I'm suffering. Your life looks pretty much back to normal. You've gone back to work, but here I am heartbroken at home. It's really hard to remain in a place of non-judgment. But remember the fact that people grieve at different rates, and people also display their grief in very, very different ways. Some people don't verbalize it at all. They just deal with it internally. And so that's why talking is really important. I'll always suggest to people using one of my books. They all have grief support work within them. So Saying Goodbye has 90 days of grief support work. The Baby Loss Guide and Beyond Goodbye have 60 days. And Pregnancy After Loss journeys with you from the moment you find out you're pregnant until your baby is in your arms at 40 weeks. But in all of the grief support work, people often do that as a couple, and it's been written like that. So you can either do it individually or on your own, or you can do it in partnership with each other, or you can even do it with friends and do it with a group of friends. And every day you do the task for the day together as a group. And that might be you meet in person, or it might be you just discuss it on social media with one another. What have you written here today? And it's really great way of learning where your partner is or where your friends are on their journey by doing that with them. And the important thing is processing that grief and realizing that some of what you're feeling, you might not even connect to your baby loss, but actually it's intrinsically linked to that baby loss. And so by doing grief exercises and grief work, your brain eventually starts to accept, okay, I've been through this. It's truly horrific, but I accept what I've been through. And that's the point that we all need to get through when we've gone through loss, is that acceptance. And it's trying to get your brain to be comfortable with what you've gone through. And so it is able to talk, it's able to communicate about it. And through that, that's how you get stronger at carrying the loss you've gone through. But grief exercises are the number one way of doing that. So whether you do it as a couple or individually, it can be essential for people to do it. For some, they feel that they need to go straight to a therapist. And again, of course, I'm a big advocate of that. If you feel stuck in your grief, if you feel unable to cope, if you feel like life isn't worth living anymore, that is sadly a horrendous part of the grieving journey. Most people will go through that, but for some people, they can't move through that and they remain at that place. And that's where it's really essential to get a counsellor, a therapist, to help you work through those feelings, because it's like your brain has just become stuck at a particular stage. And if you're feeling like you can't get out of bed in the morning, if you're feeling like you can't find joy in anything, and you don't want to eat, you don't want to sleep, maybe you're haunted by nightmares, which is another way that the brain tries to process grief. If you're not allowing it time to do that in the day, it will try to do that at night. And so people will often struggle with insomnia because they become frightened of going to sleep, because they know their brain is trying to work through so many painful things when they sleep, which can result in nightmares and night terrors. And so all of those things can be a signal that maybe you need to find some external help. And so I'd encourage you, if you're at that point, to do that. And if you see a therapist who you don't feel is helpful, it's okay to say that and say, I'm going to go find somebody else, because it's also important that you bond with the person, that you feel comfortable with that person. And it's kind of normal to need to go through maybe 2 or 3 different people before you find somebody you go, okay, that's my person who I can deal with this with. So don't give up if the first person you see you don't feel is helpful, but also go in with realistic expectations. If people ever used to come to see me who are very much like, well, I just don't feel better now, why don't I feel better? I'd be very much like, well, that's an expectation on you, and an expectation that is far too high for a therapy session. Reality of therapy, it's a process. It will always be a process, and you might not see the effects of all of that talking for a few months down the line. For some, it's years down the line, but you're not going to come out feeling okay. You're not going to come out saying, oh, I suddenly feel comfortable with everything I've gone through. That's just not how therapy works. And sadly, people often enter therapy with that expectation, and then so disappointed that they still feel really rubbish at the end of a few weeks. And yeah, so stick with it, but also be mindful that you may need to change people that you're seeing. And some people, they just need somebody with a different personality to help them through.
Yeah, that's great advice, actually, because a lot of people I speak to say they didn't feel they needed to go see a counsellor with what they're going through. And that can be those that have been struggling with infertility, those that have been through recurrent loss. They haven't felt that they needed to see a counsellor. When they have, that it hasn't felt very helpful. It was a bit of a tick box exercise. And it's more likely they haven't found the right person, or they've expected results too quickly. And maybe it's that thing of giving it time to go through, because there's so many complex emotions that will have led them to that point in the first place, that having one therapy session or one session with the counsellor just isn't going to touch the surface, is it? With that,
no, not at all. And it's really hard. We all want to be rescued. We all want that life ring to be thrown to us and pulled out. And if that doesn't instantly happen, then that can be really hard to accept when you're really struggling and every day is so hard. So if you're going for weekly sessions and actually it's not helping you, it can feel like you're treading water, and perhaps even feel like you're drowning and you're just desperate to be rescued. And it's knowing the fact that no one can just rescue you. And you know, counselling and therapy isn't for everyone. There is a good proportion of the public who don't need it and wouldn't ever need it. And actually, it may do them more harm than good, because their personality is the type that doesn't respond well to it, and they're better just dealing with things on a very personal level. So I'm certainly not flying the flag that everyone should go to a therapist at all. I just think that for some people it's so beneficial, for others not. But for those who aren't comfortable with it, a great way of just accessing support is via like saying goodbye or other charities, or by doing the work themselves in their home, which is why I included the grief guides in the book and didn't just make it a therapist manual. That I wanted people to be able to walk out of a hospital and either be given the book in the hospital or buy it and suddenly be able to start processing these things themselves in a methodical way, because not everyone will end up with a counsellor, even if they want it, because sadly here in the UK, resources are really limited. You have to display often severe PTSD to access any sort of free help. And so people, even those who want it, sadly often can't access it because of financial restraints. And so that's why I feel it's really important that we do also put these resources out into the public domain, which is what I did in my book. And for those who can't afford even the book, you can, the baby loss guide is also an audio book, and there's lots of platforms out there where you can sign up for a free trial, and that gives you access to 1 or 2 free books. And so I always say to anyone, if you're struggling financially, 1, just go to your library and borrow a copy of one of my books. You don't need to own it. Or 2, download the free audiobook version, so you actually get the support you need. I'd absolutely hate people to not be able to access it because of money.
Oh, that's great advice, and it's great that that option is there for people, because then you're not limiting it, are you?
Yeah.
And I know your most recent one, it kind of leads on well, is looking at pregnancy after loss, because again, I speak to a lot of people who are just terrified, who they've got pregnant again, or they're wanting to get pregnant again, but they're just terrified that the same thing will happen because that's the only experience they have. And do you have any advice that you could give them, just a little bit of advice on just kind of how to sort of coping through that, really?
Yeah, and it's so hard. And for those who are terrified of trying again, that's very much covered in the baby loss guide. So I always get asked, is pregnancy after loss, which is my 4th book, for those who are just considering getting pregnant. And actually, it is a guidebook for those who are pregnant. Now, I would encourage you, if you're frightened because you feel, how am I going to navigate it, then it is a good book for you to get hold of and to then have a read through it and then put it in your drawer, because actually knowing the support is there waiting for you. You can think, okay, I don't need to be so terrified because I know I've got this. So for some people, it is really beneficial to pre-read it to getting pregnant. However, the baby loss guide, I cover being frightened to try again, not actually wanting to try again, and navigating all of those complex feelings. And then pregnancy after loss, which I've got here, is for when you are actually expecting. And this is the book that I wanted and so desperately needed after going through my losses. I just wanted something that made me feel understood, that didn't try and trivialize what I'd been through. It gave a proper platform for that and said it's relevant, it's part of your story, it will be forever part of your story, so it needs to be recognized and acknowledged. But I also needed somebody to give me that faith that this time it's different, that this time it could end very differently than the previous pregnancy. And so when I started writing it, I really thought it was going to be a baby guide kind of. And then I realized there's so many of those out there. And as I started writing, I realized what I was writing was almost a war manual. It was a guide to navigating the terror in your mind, which is there totally legitimately because of your story, whether it be because you've gone through loss or because you've journeyed with somebody else through loss. So you know that all pregnancies don't end well, and that innocence of pregnancy, of presuming everything's going to go well, has been removed from you, whether it be because of your journey or someone else's. And so I started writing it, and as I was developing, I realized that so much of it is all about learning to control fear and learning to control anxiety without trivializing it and without making people feel, well, you're silly for feeling that. You want to know, of course you feel that. It's totally legitimate that you feel that, but here's how you can control it, or here's an aid to help you control it. And so that's what this book became. It became a book to help you still process grief, because you'll always be doing that for the rest of your life. So it's got grief work within it. And the more you deal with that, the easier it is to cope with being pregnant again. But it also helps you engage with this pregnancy and not kind of pretend it's not happening because you're so frightened of losing this child. So you want to be able to still bond with that child. You want to celebrate that they're there and just pray that they get to stay. But no one can guarantee to you that they will. So you don't want the fear that they might go to be trivialized, because actually it's totally legitimate, especially if you've gone through a later loss, that if you've gone through that, you don't even have any sort of peace of mind when you get into your final trimester. The terror is equal all the way through. And so it's really important that we say to people, what you're going through is normal, but here's a helping hand to help you through it. And so that's what this book is. And it gives people exercises every single day. It's full of expert advice from the leading midwives, the leading obstetricians, and dentists. And there's one section on that. And I love that because of like dental health when it comes to you're pregnant and what should you worry about. And it's got physios on how to deal with pains and things, where when you're pregnant and you've never gone through a loss, a pain is just a pain. When you're pregnant after loss, you're analysing every little symptom and thinking, is this a sign that something's going wrong? And so there's lots of expert advice in there, but there's also people's personal stories. And for some people, that's really comforting to read, but for other people, it can be a trigger. And so what I've done in it is all of the personal stories are in a grey box. And so if you're a person that is comforted by hearing other people's stories of how they've gone through loss but have now ended up with a baby in their arms, then those are the stories you need to read for sure. Read them, get comfort from them. However, if you're triggered by people's stories, I always say miss all of the bits in the grey boxes, just avoid them. And then when you've got a baby safe in your arms, go back and read them and see how your story resonates with their stories. But I wanted that option to be in there because for many people, they love to hear about stories. And I was one of those. I would relish people's stories of how they'd gone through loss, but here they were now with a baby in their arms. I needed that. They were my lighthouses in the darkness. But other people, they kind of want to not even think about loss and they just want to think about pregnancy. So that's why the book is designed in that way. So it gives you the option for both. And yeah, the reviews and the stories that I get every single day are just so beautiful from people who said it just became their manual. And another thing that's in it, which people really love and always share on social media, is this like advent calendar heart, and you get a little box for every week of your pregnancy. And people are always sharing them on social media, and I love it. And people color them in a rainbow of hearts, and they say it's just their highlight of their week where they get to color another box in their journey. And for some people, they've sadly gone on to lose their baby where they've journeyed with this book. And I tackle that in a tiny way at the very beginning of the book of what do you do then? And I suggest then moving on to the baby loss guide and keeping this as a keepsake, because it is a journal. There's places all the way through to write messages, to write down your feelings. And for me, if I'd had this for the 5 babies I'd lost, it would be my treasure now. It'd be the thing I would treasure, all of those things I wrote about that baby and how I was feeling, where I have nothing like that. I've got my pregnancy test sticks and I've got my scan pictures, but I've got nothing that records my feelings about those pregnancies and those stories. And I would treasure that now. So I always say to people, don't fear writing in it just in case you go through loss, because actually it could become one of your prize keepsakes at the other side of it, where you want to remember how you felt. And it might be something you look back in 10 years time and just think, oh, I'm just so glad I journaled that. Because I know in my journey, I would treasure that now. I would love to read how I felt, but I don't have any of those things written down, sadly. So yeah, so it's everything I wanted and more in a book. And so I just hope it really helps anyone who's going through pregnancy after loss.
I know from speaking to people and the things that they're feeling through that, I'm fairly certain it will do. And I think the fact you've been through it and this is something you've created, knowing what you'd have wanted, makes it that much better as well. And that it will make it right for people to use. And I think it sounds like an amazing resource for them as well. So I'll definitely point people in the direction of it, because I do speak to a lot of people who are feeling like that. And I can even resonate with how I felt when my second cycle of IVF was successful. That's exactly how I felt through my pregnancy, worrying about it. It's that kind of thing, that support and the understanding that it's okay to feel that scared, that something could happen, and the worry that everything. And I used to think it must be so lovely for people who don't worry through their pregnancies about something happening all the way through, because until my son was born, I was terrified all the way through that something was happening. I bled early on, and I was told by the IVF clinic, well, if you're miscarrying, you're miscarrying. There's nothing we can do about it. And just that fear was then with me all the way through. So having something like that, even though, thankfully I haven't experienced the loss of a baby, you know, I have had experience of my IVF cycle not working, but, you know, even through that, I was terrified all the way through, because it'd taken us 6 years to get to that point, and it was the first positive test I'd ever had, you know, so I just think it's,
yeah, so scary.
you know, so useful in so many situations. So
Yeah,
just,
and I think it's that, as you say, it's about saying it's legitimate to have the fear, but here's a tool to help you navigate it. Because you don't just want someone going, oh yeah, that's right, you should feel that scared. I totally understand why you're scared, and you should be that scared. You want people to say, I totally understand it. It's totally reasonable why you're feeling it, but here's something to help you. Because it feels so suffocating when you're navigating that fear every day. And 9 months doesn't feel like 9 months anymore. It feels like a lifetime, because every 24 hours when you're worrying or scared or waiting for news or waiting for results or waiting for your next scan just feels endless. And so when you hear other people saying, oh, my pregnancy has just flown by, you're like, how is that possible? Because, you know, some are lucky enough to go through a straightforward pregnancy before going through loss. I never had that. I'd lost 3 babies before getting to bring a child home. And so I never had that innocence of pregnancy, of just presuming everything is going to go right. I've always had that waiting for the trap door to open beneath my feet. And so to me, it's such an alternate universe of people who can just sail through pregnancy and time flies by and they don't even question if something can be wrong. That is just such a wonderful naivety to pregnancy that I just wish I'd been awarded.
Yeah, I know. And I often speak to people who, you know, have luckily been able to get pregnant through IVF. And we've said the same thing. It almost robs you of that joy, because even when you've got the positive result, the worry doesn't stop there. And, you know, it's another thing that infertility takes away from you, that kind of worry. And I just think having these resources, which is, again, is why I created my planner, because I know what it's like to go through IVF, and having tools to help cope through it is what I needed when I was going through it. So I did exactly the same. I wrote it based on what I needed when I was going through treatment and struggling. And I think having those resources, obviously you wouldn't wish it on anybody to go through it, but being able to use your experience to help other people now is amazing, and it just gives them the support that they do need as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think support from people who have walked the path is the thing that really helps. I mean, anybody who kind of tried to even offer me support who hadn't either been through loss or pregnancy after loss, I was just like, you literally have no clue. and I can say that hand on heart, having been the one who was trained, who thought I had the clue. Not only was I trained, I literally journeyed with some of my bestest friends through stillbirth and miscarriage. And so I thought I totally knew it, not only because of my training, but because of that journey with them, until I went through it myself. And then I realized only personal experience can help you advise people really from the heart and truly say, I hear you, I see you, I get it. And that is what you need. That is the thing you're desperate for when you're going through loss, is somebody who will just sit in that space with you and go, I know.
Yeah.
And knowing that they truly know makes all the difference, because it's so hard to find the language, because we are not trained in the language of grief and loss because of the taboo nature of grief. And so it's like an alien language. It's like being taken out of your world, dropped into a new planet. Everybody's talking a language you don't even know, and all you're trying to find is people who you can communicate with. And so it's really important to be alongside people who get it. And that's why any resource that comes from somebody who has walked that path is so vital to those who are struggling in their hour of need.
Yeah, definitely. And it's brilliant that those resources are there as well. And I'll make sure it's signposted so people can find them. Just finally, is there anything, so for those that haven't been through it, like family members, friends who want to try and support somebody who's experiencing it, is there any advice you could give them just on how they can kind of navigate supporting their loved one through it? Any like small bits of advice just to help them so they don't say things that make it worse, I guess, which is what everybody worries about, isn't it?
Absolutely. And people say, oh, I'm worried about making it worse, but I'm presuming that's not possible. I'm like, actually, you're not going to want to hear this, but it is possible. It is possible to make it worse. You can't make the grief worse, because the grief is as big as it can be, but you can make people feel worse if you do say the wrong thing. But what I will always say to people is, it's better to show up than not show up. So don't let your fear make you stay out the room. And I think that is all of our tendency, is if we can't rescue people, and we sadly can't when it comes to grief, that we want to run in the opposite direction, because it's really hard to witness pain and to not be able to make it all better. And so to be willing to be present, to be willing to be that witness and say, I see you. I don't know what you're going through, because I've never walked that path myself, but I'm going to hold your hand, and I'm going to sit here holding the tissues, and I can't make it better, but I can cry with you. I think that's all people need often. And so if you're frightened of saying the wrong thing, try to educate yourself on the subject. In all of my guides, there are sections for family and friends. There's 2 chapters in the baby loss guide for medical professionals and friends and family. It lists things that I advise people not to say. And if you do say them, this is what's going to be heard. But I also list things that are great things to say and helpful things to say, which is really important to empower people. And so go and educate yourself on the subject, because the more you do on terminology, on the language, the more you can be helpful to your loved ones, where they don't have to explain everything to you. So you can do that work yourself and go and find that out, and then show up, and show up practically as well. In the early days, people often are so in shock, they don't know what to say. And for some, silence is almost what they need, but they need practical assistance. So don't say, call me if you need anything. You be the proactive one and say, are you okay if I come and clean your house right now? Because the last thing you need to do is to do that. If they've got children, saying, can I just take them for the day and give them a really fun day out? That can be just such a beautiful respite for parents, when children need to see loss and grief. Of course they do, but they also can be quickly overwhelmed by it. And so giving them that gift of allowing them space, taking them to some fun place, taking them to play in another person's house or in the park, can be a real gift to parents, where they give them that space to communicate with one another, and without their children being there. Also cooking for them. I always say the fact that, say, can I drop a cooked meal on your doorstep? I don't want to come in. Just at 5 p.m. every day, there's going to be a meal on your doorstep. All you need to do is open your front door and put it in your freezer or rewarm it. There's such a gift to bereaved people when their world is spinning out of control. You can give them a sense of normality, where food is on the table, where their bathroom is being cleaned. I spent all of my time crying on the bathroom floor. And so I'd always say, my mom saying, can I clean your bathroom for you? That was such a gift, because it's so much nicer to cry on a clean bathroom floor than a dirty bathroom floor. There's these little things that feel little, but when you're a bereaved person, they're huge, and they become the gifts that you'll always remember. The people who showed up, the people who weren't afraid to enter the room, the people who weren't frightened of you sitting, screaming and crying, that they were comfortable with that and would just wrap their arms around you. That's the gift.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for this talk. It's just been amazing. It's so helpful. And I know that from the people I speak to, the support they need, that this will be really helpful, and that being able to signpost them to you will be really helpful. So everybody can find all the information they need on the Saying Goodbye website then.
Yeah, go to sayinggoodbye.org to find all information, and Saying Goodbye UK on Instagram, and Saying Goodbye _charity on Instagram, Saying Goodbye UK on Facebook, where over 100,000 people are really active and follow that page. You can find me on Instagram at Zoe Adele, which is ZoeAdelle. where I post daily quotes and support on there. So please, I just encourage anyone to not suffer in silence. If you need support, the support is available to you. So just reach out and try and come along to one of the Saying Goodbye remembrance services, and you can find out details of those on the website at sayinggoodbye.org, because they're so beautiful. And we also do a monthly online service. So if there's not a service local to you, or you want to just see what it's kind of like before coming along, feel free to come along to one of the online services as well.
Oh, thank you. And I'll post all the links wherever I post this. I'll put the links to everything so that people can access the support. But thank you so much. It's been so helpful and so lovely to speak to you.
Oh, thank you.